Hello, my name is Steve Dubin. I am the host of Business Way Outside the Box, sponsored by PR Works. We focus on businesses and organizations that are unusual, that add real value to people's lives. And today we have a guest who talks about ways to avoid foreclosure of your home. Some people feel it's a fatal flaw, and it doesn't have to be. And our guest today, Mike Russell from Hope for Hardship, will tell us about ways you can mitigate that problem. And welcome aboard, Mike.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Steve. Good to see you.
So let's start at the beginning, Mike. You actually went through this horrible mess yourself, and it's one of the reasons you have great empathy for helping people at no charge to get out of this catch-22 themselves.
Sure. I did. Yes, I faced foreclosure. I had to lose some property to foreclosure. Ended up filing bankruptcy, both personal and corporate, in my life. Um, I can't really think of a single decision that I made well back during that time. I made just about every wrong decision there was, and which ended up extending the strife and the financial crisis in my life far longer than it needed to go on. And all these years later, turning my life around, turning my finances around, turning everything around about my life, it's my honor to kind of pay that forward to the next man or woman and just share my experience, strength, and hope as it relates to coming out of a situation of financial crisis in a far better position than I did.
Okay, and so let's talk about sort of the process itself. Step one, how do people tend to find themselves in this mess?
Oh boy, that's a litany of reasons, right? I've yet to meet someone who's losing their property or at threat of losing their property to foreclosure that doesn't have any other real significant problems in their life. In my experience, the mortgage is the last bill you stop paying. And so there's been a lot of other problems leading up to that typically. And these are people from all walks of life facing familial issues, whether it be divorce. I've seen abuse. I've seen substance abuse. I've seen loss of jobs. There's so many different reasons why people get into this kind of situation. And what's most important is taking the necessary steps early on in order to mitigate the loss and the pain that comes from these kind of things.
Okay, and so what's when do banks tend to send you the first letter, make the first call, have the first contact that they're concerned?
Sure. Well, I mean, hey, one 30-day late and you'll get their attention, you know. But in order for them, typically in order for them to take the legal steps toward foreclosure, typically you'll see 6 months in default. 6 months of non-payment is a good range of when a bank will begin to take those legal steps and start checking the boxes of those earmarks in their mortgage documentation, granting the consumer the right to cure, starting certain periods to cover the bank legally. And about 6 months is when you typically see those kind of things start to happen.
Okay, and then what's step one? Once I see this, starting to unfold, what do I do?
Sure. So the first, most people know that this is a problem. I've yet to meet someone who isn't paying their mortgage and doesn't know it. That's rare. But when it becomes a problem is when the constable shows up to your house and delivers you a notice of intent to foreclose, a relatively official looking document, and the process is unceremonious and often can feel embarrassing. But that is the notice. That is essentially the clock has started ticking. From the moment that public notice is recorded, it becomes paramount that you begin open, effective communication dialogue with your lender. And one of the problems here, Steve, is people get lulled into a false sense of security. And people tend to shove things under the rug and kind of bury their head in the sand. And it goes back to what I was saying about you have a lot of other problems in your life typically when this is happening. And all of those problems are chaotic and are creating great anxiety in your life. And so I've met so many people who the mortgage problem is actually a secondary or a third problem in the hierarchy of life problems. And that's what makes it so common for people to not stand up, take the appropriate steps because they are just bogged down with other chaotic issues in their life. And that's really where we come in. Because I pride myself on being an emotional barrier between the pain and the guilt and the remorse and the regret of how people are feeling and dealing with the bank. When you're the one that is at threat and in fear, it is often impossible to effectively communicate from a confident position with the very entity that is threatening your home. And so that's the greatest work that we do is we jump in between the consumer and the bank and we communicate directly with the bank and we check all the boxes required in order to create a request for assistance. And that's what we're doing. We are helping people craft, submit, follow up on, and complete great applications for assistance for their hardship that they are facing. One of the biggest frustrations, and it's more than 60% of Americans with a mortgage today are at less than 3% in a fixed long-term product. And I can't even begin to effectively describe well with the spoken word just how damn valuable that is. Never at another time in my life were that many people in America sitting in a low interest, sub 3% long term fixed mortgage rate. That cost of living is phenomenal across the board. And in order to replace that housing, your cost of living is going to multiply by a minimum of 2 times. And it is so important, if at all possible, to keep that low interest, long term fixed rate intact and stay in your home, to do absolutely everything in your power to try to hang on to that product, because that can carry you multiple decades into the future at an affordable rate. And that's the work that we're really trying to do. We're trying to keep as many people as possible in those outstanding terms because every option outside of that is worse. Everyone.
And so another phenomenon within the real estate market now is that the home that you might have bought even 5 years ago has so much more value than it did when you made the purchase that the uh, the loss of or the lack of paying does not mitigate the revenue you've made from the home.
It's bananas. Yeah, I've never seen it in my life, probably never will again. 43% property appreciation in the last 5 years. Insane. And so, yes, there are, and so, yes, if selling your home is the best choice because you can't retain it, you're going to make money on that property 99 times out of 100, a good amount of money. And speaking from experience, I can tell you for certain that if your housing situation must change, having money in the bank when it does is far better than not. And that's what happened to me. When I went through this stuff, like I said, I made all the wrong decisions, and I still meet people every day who make the wrong decisions. And so it's sort of a timeline, right? When the clock starts ticking, as soon as the bank issues the notice of intent to foreclose, these people are bombarded. And that's part of the stress and the struggle. They are bombarded by people with various business models. And in my opinion, attempting to capitalize on what they perceive to be the misfortune of others, right? And so there are people who, hey, I'll buy your house cash. I'll buy it quick. We can close fast. You need to file bankruptcy. Send me $4,000. You need to protect yourself. Pay me $1,000 a month, and I'll do a loan modification for you. Just set up an ACH withdrawal. These people don't have money to pay their mortgage. They certainly don't have money to pay someone to do this. They're getting bombarded by effective communicators, salespeople who are attempting to get them to make a choice, a decision that, in my opinion, in my experience, it's not time to make it yet. And that's where I think we really become different than anyone I've met out there that does this sort of work. And that is that I want to exhaust every possible option in order to retain that low interest fixed rate mortgage, stay in your home before you feel forced to make a rash decision. A decision to leave your housing may very well be in the future, and it behooves everyone to understand that and to find a path to accepting that that may happen. But it is so much better for the consumer if that time comes that they feel inside that they exhausted every possible measure in order to retain it. They don't feel that it's urgent and I must sell my house for less than it's really worth, or I must make some rash decision. And that's really what I work hard to be, Steve, is I want to be a calming force in people's lives and help them understand the timeline of effective decision-making paradigms here. This is a function of, because of my experience working with these banks, it's tremendously easy to buy some time with the bank, because I have direct contact to a lot of these single points of contact and relationship managers that I've built over the years. I can explain effectively to them, look, we're attempting this, or if the property ends up going on the market, look, here's a copy, it's on the market. We've received an offer that will satisfy the full payoff. Here's a copy of the offer. Please extend the auction date. Please let us get to the closing table. You're going to get all your money. I hate seeing people negotiate with one potential buyer, and I see that quite a bit. So there are people that will buy your house cash, these guys that come out when they see these lists, and they make an offer that is not fair market value. It's fair to the buyer, and the seller feels pressured because of the uncertainty and the fear and the doom and gloom of the looming foreclosure. And so they end up making a deal to sell their property for less than they needed to. I'm obviously a proponent of just basic common sense. To me, if you're going to sell something when you have the highest number of potential buyers, your price goes higher. If you're just negotiating with one buyer, you're often leaving yourself short. And so it's possible, I would say about 30% of the time, we are unable to get someone to remain in that low interest fixed long-term mortgage. So that 30% of the time, that's when the decision time comes and the consumer needs to decide, what am I going to do? I do have to leave. Let's sell the property. Let's command the most possible amount of money so we can create a soft landing for myself and my family and have a little money in the bank in a timeline that doesn't feel pressured and urgent. And part of the biggest problem, Steve, that I face is the human condition, right? And I fully understand it. I empathize. When I went through this, I had 2 years of unopened mail on my dining room table. And so I get it. You're afraid. You conjure up stories in your mind that you convince yourself are true, and either you feel falsely secure or you're just ignoring it or whatever other reason. So oftentimes people in this situation will force themselves to that hairy edge where they have no choice but to be desperate and be in desperation and accept less money for their property or make a bad decision and end up in a worse place. And so it's a lot of work, and but it's tremendously rewarding when I can sit down with someone and go through this process and see the relief on their face.
And so let's just take a step back. What is the process? Somebody is ready to admit that they need help. They reach out to you.
Sure.
What are the steps that you take to help them get to the point where they have a good chance of staying in their home, or at least you reach some kind of resolution that might benefit them?
Yeah. So it's 50-50, right? About 50% of the time when I meet someone that reaches out to me, they have not yet applied for assistance. about 50% of the time they already did. And so the people who haven't yet, let's talk about them. The people who have not applied, we meet with them. We craft an effective, accurate, and believable application that the bank can see, because supporting documentation needs to be improved. When you're applying for assistance from your bank, you have to prove that you're a viable bet, that you are likely to be able to resume your normal payments if they help you with the past due balance. And you do that by proving income, employment or assistance of any kind. You do that by proving that. A relatively vague listing of average monthly expenses, utilities, that kind of thing. You put that package together, you provide the supporting documentation. And then sometimes there are letters of explanation that need to be drafted. If you have large deposits that can't be explained in your bank account, whatever, there are a million different reasons. Or if you haven't filed your taxes in the last year, all sorts of different things that you need to explain to a bank, because it is going to an underwriting department. And then we submit that application. And then every 3 business days, we follow up with the bank for a status update. And that's really the key. And then speaking to the 50% of the people who did apply, and so many people will say, well, I sent the application in 2 months ago, I haven't heard anything. And that's when, it's what we do. We forget that it's our job to chase the bank, not the bank's job to chase us. And so that's so common. People submit an application, they never hear back, and the next thing they know, there's an auction being scheduled, and they're on the phone with me saying, but I applied for assistance. So a large part of our work that we do is follow up with the bank on a regular basis, because our whole intent is to get the bank, the underwriting department, the servicer, to deem that application satisfactorily complete. Once it is deemed complete, it goes under review with the bank. And once the review period begins, they pause foreclosure proceedings and the consumer can breathe a little bit. And now we know we're under review. They're reviewing their file. And within 30 days, unless there are holidays like December, we had a few extensions, but it's typically 30 days, the bank will report back to us with a results letter. And that results letter effectively has 2 buckets. There are 2 types of assistance you can get from a bank. There are retention assistance options, of course, meaning you keep the home, you retain the property. And so in that bucket, it can be a loan modification, a full reinstatement, a payment plan, a trial period modification, a partial claim mortgage, various options in there. Then we review those options with the consumer and we explain to them which ones we believe are best and why. And then the non-retention options are less frequent. That would be, we, the bank, are willing to work with you on this loan and the balance, but you need to sell the asset. We will work with you in something like a short sale if they owe more than the property is worth or something like that. So they give those results. We meet with the consumer. Like I said, a little more than 70% of the time, those retention options are obtained and new loan documentation is overnighted to our office, and we meet the consumer. We notarize the document, we send it back out. And as long as within about 60 days of that modification to the mortgage, they have to resume their normal payments, but they retain that 2.875% 30-year fixed mortgage. Those are the best deals, man. I'll tell you, I cannot stress how important it is to have outstanding mortgage terms for your primary residence home. There's nothing more valuable.
Well, right. So as an example, let's just use a broad-based example. Let's say your mortgage payment is $1,000 a month at that low rate of somewhere around 3%, let's say.
Yeah.
If it goes to today's rate, which is close to 7,
Yeah.
does that more than double your payment if you
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I just went through it twice this week. Their payment was $1,700. And the bank was offering to modify the terms at 7.25%, add 10 years onto the maturity date, and the new payment was $3,413.
Crazy.
Unaffordable.
And so what do you do in that case? Do you negotiate again? That's not a viable option?
We appealed. We appealed the decision. That took 40 days. The appeal was denied, and they had no choice but to sell the property.
Gotcha. Okay.
They had no choice. And it took about 170 days, a little less than 6 months, to get through that entire process. But during that time, the foreclosure proceedings were paused, which is a great benefit. And so if you're doing it correctly and you have the bank's attention and you are effectively communicating on a regular basis and making sure that everything's still in play, they'll pause that foreclosure proceeding, and you're not living in fear of an auction being set. And that's one of the problems. Is it's tremendously challenging to sell a home in America when there is a public auction date advertised already. You don't have the luxury of time, and that's where the desperation comes in. If the timeline is not effectively explained and manipulated with the bank, then what happens to people is they end up trying to put their property on the market, but there's an auction scheduled in 30 days. And the end buyer of your home, is very likely to be getting financing. They'll want a home inspection. There are attorneys involved and commitments and appraisals, and you just don't have the luxury of time to maximize return on the asset because you don't have a wide enough window. And that's why effectively communicating with the bank is so important. Is you can keep banks at bay and get them to postpone auction dates to allow for a closing to take place, as long as you can prove to them they are going to be paid in full.
Okay, and so let me summarize. So part of the components of what your nonprofit offer at no charge to people who are facing foreclosure are consultation. Let's figure out what's going on and let's give you some advice. Secondly, you'll actually get on a three-way call or whatever it takes with the bank to have the initial conversation and potentially start the documentation to try to cure the problem. And then on the back end, when that cure comes in or whatever that offer from the bank is, you'll help negotiate that as well.
Absolutely. Yep. No
Okay.
question. Yeah.
All right. And you would also assist them if indeed they wanted to sell the home, you would provide some sort of recommendations as to how to do that in the most
Absolutely.
efficient way.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
we believe that it's premature to decide to sell your home so early in the game, because selling your home is it will put some money in your pocket. And if that's what you have to do after exhausting all options, okay. But don't be pressured into feeling like you must do that early on. First, exhaust every possible option to hang on to that 3 or 2.5% 30-year fixed mortgage rate, because once it's gone, you'll miss it.
Right.
You will miss it.
All right. Great. Well, so tell us how folks can reach you to have the
Sure.
initial conversation to see how your
Yeah,
nonprofit and your free
absolutely.
service will work for them.
Yeah, so you can go to our website, learn a little about my story and what we do. It's hope, the number 4, hardship.org. Or you can call me direct, 508-501-9214.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. Terrific service. Thank you for explaining it. And I'm sure you'll be able to help many of our listeners.
Thank you very much, Steve. Have a good day.
All right.